One of the most common pieces of language learning advice is this. If you want to become fluent in German, you need to stop thinking in English and start thinking in German. I had a student come to me, probably lesson 6, not so long ago, and she was discouraged and she said, I know I should be thinking in German, but I have this horrible habit of translating from English. And my reaction was, why are we telling beginners to think in a language they don't know yet? If you've only had 6 German lessons, of course you're still relying on English. You don't know enough German to think in German. Thinking in German isn't something you learn to do in order to become more fluent. More accurately, according to skill acquisition research, it's something that begins to happen because your knowledge of the language becomes more accessible and eventually automatic. So, really, it's the other way around. Fluency leads to thinking in German. If you make thinking in German your goal too early, you may end up measuring your progress against something you can't simply decide to do. So, in this video, I want to look at why translation isn't necessarily a bad habit, how German becomes more and more accessible without English and eventually automatic, and what you might want to focus on instead of not translating. So, let's talk about that supposedly horrible habit translation. Stop translating is another one of those instructions that sounds perfectly reasonable, especially if you're talking to someone who's constructing a whole sentence in English and then translating it word for word into German. Don't do that, it's not going to work. But that doesn't mean that every mental connection between two languages is bad, or that beginners should somehow stop those connections from forming, or skip a step and not translate at all. Imagine you're learning the word Hund. At first, you may hear the word Hund, then you translate it in your head to your first language, dog. And then you access the concept, dog. That comes along with all the information that you associate with dogs. So we could represent that process like this: Hund, dog, concept. Imagine you're encountering the German word Hund more and more often. Each time you're translating it and you're retrieving the concept. So it's Hund, dog, concept. Hund, dog, concept. And eventually, the German word Hund is going to form a direct connection to the concept of dogs. And you're going to skip the translation step eventually because you've done this 3-step process of encountering the word and then translating it and then retrieving the concept. So translating isn't a step you can skip, it's something that eventually disappears because you've done it so many times. So don't translate is kind of like saying get good. It is something that happens as you become more proficient, but this advice doesn't tell someone how it happens or what they can actually do to encourage it. Let's take a look at the research. Automaticity is the ability to do something quickly, accurately, and with relatively little conscious effort as a result of repeated practice. So if you hear Guten Morgen and you understand it without translating anything at all, that cognitive processing has become highly automatic. If you say ich weiß nicht without consciously thinking about the subject and the conjugation and the word order, that language is available to you relatively automatically. But automaticity develops gradually, and skill acquisition theory gives us one way to understand that development. Different versions of the theory use slightly different terminology, but I'm going with De Keyser and Suzuki's 3 broad stages: declarative, procedural, and automatic. At the declarative stage, you know facts about how German works. You've memorized rules. For example, a regular verb takes an st ending with du. You may be able to apply the rule correctly, but you have to think about it. So, du means you. The verb is wohnen. Wohnen is a regular verb. And with du, I need st. So, du wohnst, du wohnst in Berlin. Du wohnst in It'd go like that. With repeated use, that knowledge begins to proceduralize. Instead of consciously retrieving the rule, so you go wohnen minus the en, and then you need the personal endings. What do? You see du, and you produce wohnst more directly now. But proceduralized knowledge, or language, isn't effortless. You may still need time and effort to produce language at this level reliably. With more and more practice, it becomes increasingly automatic. faster, more accurate, and less demanding of your attention. That matters because attention is limited. You definitely want to reduce your cognitive load if possible. If you're concentrating on a verb ending, you have fewer resources available to listen to and comprehend what is being said, plan your message, think about vocabulary, interpret your conversation partner's reactions, and everything else you have to do while you're talking. Think about a student driver. At first, they have to consciously think about the mirrors, the turn signals, the pedals, the steering, the speed, everything else. But we don't tell a student driver, you need to stop thinking about that and just do it. Skip that step. Actually, it's very important to us that the student driver is thinking about those things, and quite consciously too, because we understand that the mechanics of driving aren't automatic yet. Now, take that same student driver, but 5 years later. Maybe most of those things have become quite automatic for them by now. But put them on an unfamiliar road in the middle of a rainstorm, and suddenly they're paying very close attention to everything again. Of course, language works the same way. You might be able to order a coffee automatically, or be able to converse in the classroom very comfortably, but you start searching for words when you get in a fast paced argument about something more complex. The point is, automaticity isn't an on and off switch, and it isn't equal across every task and context. That doesn't mean you've randomly gone backwards. And that brings me to some practical advice. First, practice retrieving and using your German. Recall a word before checking your notes. Finish a sentence yourself before checking the answer. Engage in conversation, even a little bit. You want to strengthen your active fluency skills, not just your passive skills like listening and reading. Second, vary the conditions in which you practice your German. Listen at home and in the car. You should practice plenty in quiet settings, but also sometimes with distractions, time pressure, and the unpredictability of a real conversation. Memory can be context dependent. Information can be easier to recall when the conditions you're in resemble those in which the information was learned. But German isn't something you're going to need in only one context. Studying and using your German in a variety of situations can help you be more prepared to use it later. Also, practice the skills you actually want to improve. So if you want to speak more automatically, you need conversation practice, not more audiobooks or grammar drills. Deliberately thinking in German can be part of that process. You can describe what you see. You can tell yourself what you need from the grocery store. But notice what you're doing. You're practicing the retrieval of the German you already have access to. You're not refusing to think about anything that you don't know how to say, because that you would need English for. And if you need the translation step, you're not punishing yourself. Instead of asking, am I thinking in German yet? Try asking yourself, can I understand familiar German without translating every sentence? Can I retrieve common words and expressions easily and quickly? Can I retrieve familiar sentence patterns without reconstructing the grammar every time? Can I follow a conversation when I don't know every single word? And am I making progress on these things? These are concrete signs that your German is becoming more automatic. So please don't try to police what language appears in your mind. Your goal should be to build up your German, practice accessing it under a variety of conditions, and gradually make that access faster, easier, and more reliable. So, should you think in German? Eventually, you probably will, at least for the language, topics, and situations that have become familiar to you. But you don't need to force it, and you certainly don't need to feel guilty if your brain is still using English or another first language. Thinking in German isn't the secret that produces fluency. It's one of the things that begins to emerge as your German becomes more fluent or automatic. So, if, one day soon, you find yourself having a whole conversation in German without any English entering your mind at all, it won't be because you forced yourself to think in German. It will be because, in that moment, you no longer needed to.